Hey there, quick little video to talk about shock and spring mounting on a coil spring CMAX chassis. This is the chassis from my D110 build, and excuse the giant awesome bumper in the front. We're pretty happy to have that on there and protect our hard body D110. As you can see, they have coil spring suspension on this truck, and we're using the Axial coils. This is an SCX10 coil spring, and the coil spring is actually longer than the shock. So what that means is when you put the spring into the coil buckets, they won't come out, and that's kind of important. I will just drop this back in here so I can show you the whole setup. We've been using the Axial SCX10 coil springs along with a few others that we've had off of miscellaneous shocks. They seem to work good. So if you're going to set up your SCX2 or RC four-wheel drive axle or TM8 axle, we recommend that you use this shock position for all of your coil spring CMAX trucks. Of course, the CMAX coil trucks come with the coil bucket here and the coil pad on top. And then we have mounts available on shapeways for the other axles. And the TM8 axle with the coils already comes with a coil pad already on it, so that's really straightforward. The shock mounts on the front of the TM8 axles are the same as the leaf spring, in case you were wondering. We have a flathead screw that goes through the rubber ring, and then the rubber O-ring goes to the side of the shock eye. The shock eye has another rubber O-ring on the other side, and then it screws all into the plastic housing from shapeways. So that's how we do the front coil and shock suspension. And you'll notice on top, very similar to the leaf spring mount that we use for the shock mount on the leaf truck, we're using the flathead screw into a rubber O-ring. The rubber O-ring goes to the shock head, and then there's another rubber O-ring to a nut, and then the nut screws right into the shock tower, which, as you know from your CMAX coil spring kit, the shock tower is actually machined right into this 7075 component right here that holds the top of your spring cup. In the rear, the coil suspension in the rear of the CMAX is the very same parts on the frame as it is in the front. And so you use the same technique for the shock mounting. In that case, you can also use the same spring. We're using Axial SCX10 springs in the back, and it turns out that these particular springs are the blue SCX10 springs. Very happy with the weight of those for using a big heavy body like a D110. And the truck is very secure sitting there with all of its gigantic weight up top, and it doesn't seem to flop too much. So with your coil spring and shock setup, we recommend you do your attachment like this. You can, if you so decide, you can actually create a very small plate of styrene that goes across the spring between the coils, and then you can actually screw it into the bottom of this screw right here should you decide you want to actually capture the coil, or you can put a screw, an M3 screw, into the axle housing right here in the coil bucket on the TM8. If you decide that you want to do extra strong spring attachment, I don't find a need for that. With the spring longer than the shock, the spring will never come out. So unless you feel like you need to do a spring capture on them, this is the setup that we are recommending. And we're looking forward to seeing your coil spring setups on your CMAX. Keep watching.